text, Matthew 7, verse 28 to 29. And it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. At the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount, the Gospel records the response of the crowd. After hearing the words spoken throughout Matthew chapters 5 through 7, the listeners were struck with astonishment. The narrative does not say they merely admired his eloquence or appreciated his moral insight. Rather, they were overwhelmed by the authority that accompanied his teaching. The astonishment of the crowds arises from a contrast that Matthew intentionally highlights. Jesus taught as one having authority and not as the scribes. The scribes were the recognized interpreters of the law of Moses. Their method was to appeal constantly to tradition and prior rabbinic authorities. Their teaching relied on inherited interpretations and the accumulated judgments of earlier teachers. They spoke in the chain of tradition. Jesus, however, spoke differently. Throughout the Sermon on the Mount, he repeatedly declared, "You have heard that it was said, but I say unto you." With these words, he did not merely comment on the law. He spoke as the one who stood above it in authority. His words carried the weight of divine authorship. The law and the prophets had anticipated a coming figure who would embody and bring their purpose to completion. And in this discourse, that reality began to appear with clarity. The authority of Jesus in this moment is not only the authority of a teacher, but the authority of the promised king who had arrived within Israel's history. The Sermon on the Mount belongs entirely within that historical setting. The audience hearing him consisted of first-century Israelites living under the covenant given at Sinai. His words addressed the condition of that covenant people during the closing days of the age that had governed them for centuries. Within the sermon, Jesus exposed the true intent of the law. The scribes and Pharisees had reduced righteousness to outward compliance and external performance. Yet Jesus revealed the depth of the law's demands by addressing anger as the root of murder, lust as the root of adultery, and retaliation as the distortion of justice. By bringing these realities to light, he demonstrated that the righteousness required by the covenant could never be satisfied by human effort. At the same time, the sermon continually points beyond itself to the one speaking. The authority in his words signals that he is not merely interpreting the covenant, but bringing its story toward its decisive fulfillment. Everything spoken by the prophet, every command given through Moses, and every promise embedded in Israel's scriptures was moving toward its culmination. The amazement of the crowds, therefore, reflects more than admiration for a powerful message. They sensed that something greater than traditional instruction had taken place. A voice unlike the scribes had spoken among them, a voice that carried the authority of the kingdom of heaven itself. That authority would soon be demonstrated in events that unfolded within that same generation. The mission of Jesus would lead to his death and resurrection, acts through which the burden of sin and the condemnation produced by the law would be decisively dealt with. What the law demanded but could never produce would be accomplished through him. In this way, the authority seen in Matthew 7, verses 28 to 29, is the authority of the one who brings the covenant story to its appointed completion. The astonishment of the crowds marks the moment when Israel first hears the voice of the one who stands as the fulfillment of everything that had been written before. The scribes spoke from tradition, but Jesus spoke as the living source of the truth itself.